It's really nice to be here and to talk to all of you. And just several seconds ago, I asked David who are going to join us, and I'm really happy to have this diverse geography, especially from the region, because this kind of events are the places where complicated regions like the Caucasus, peoples from these regions have an opportunity to talk to each other. Because when you have several decades of conflict, sometimes we have generations who never met each other. And they create this very dehumanized image of each other. And that is one of the pillars of this conflict. So today we are not going to talk about conflict, but we are going to talk about this colonial, neo-colonial and post-colonial influences and relations that Russia have with this region. South Caucasus is not my main region. My PhD thesis was focus was on the North Caucasus. That's why today's paper was mainly authored by Anush Brutyan, who is more focused on our region and especially current issues. So Anush will present our paper, and I hope we will have also enough time to discuss, to raise questions, and try to reply them. Thank you very much. Anush, you can start.
So thank you, Naira. I'm trying to use the new technologies. Sorry, wait a moment. Naira, can you please help me with our presentation? Naira? Hello, Naira.
Just a second, Anush. I'm going to share my screen.
Yes. Thanks a lot. So, hi everyone. Thanks to my colleague Naira, to the organizational team and all participants from different states. I am Anush Brutyan, the junior researcher at the Center for Culture and Civilization Studies, as Professor said. Before starting, I just want to add that everything I'm saying today is not an axiom, and you can debate and you should do it. I will try to discover my point of view, and today's next lectures also will help us to create a wider picture of reality in the South Caucasus. Currently, we're going to speak about the influence of imperialism and colonialism on the regional states, trying to understand that when we consider features of Russian Empire and USSR as colonial or imperial, as we discuss the continuity of the Russian foreign policy, what are the main causality of Russian post-Soviet foreign policy towards the South Caucasus states and vice versa? Great, we're waiting. Thanks.
Just a second, I'm trying to fix this.
Okay, the main question is, why does neither Russia nor one of the South Caucasus states succeed to develop the proper strategy towards each other, despite the fact of sharing the borders with Azerbaijan and Georgia and being a proclaimed strategic partner in the case of Armenia? How colonial aspects influence the current state of relations among Russia from one side and the South Caucasus states from another? Those are the issues we're going to analyze and discuss during our meeting. The reality of international relations in the South Caucasus is very interesting, thanks to its rich and complicated past. Interstate relations in the region have also moved in unpredictable directions. Georgia has been the real partner of Russia in the context of the Caucasus in the 19th century. It later produced some of the central figures for the Soviet Union, such as Beria and Stalin. Yet since 1991, things have changed. Relations between Russia and Georgia have been tense at best. Azerbaijan is now a solid ally of Turkey despite deep religious difference. By contrast, Armenia, the world's oldest Christian nation, now enjoys cordial relations with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Turkey, Iran, and Russia still are the main external, currently even more, let's say, domesticated players in the region. Except for the brief period of turmoil during the Bolshevik Revolution and the ensuing civil war, the entire Caucasus will remain within the Russian sphere until the collapse of the Soviet Union. In the independent South, Russia continues to play a significant role in economy, energy, and security policy. So, what are the definitions of colonial, post-colonial, and neo-colonial? Naira, please, the next slide. At first, let's try to find the theoretical frames to impose it with our regional realities. Colonialism belongs to Western imperial tradition of knowledge. It is practiced mostly practice by which a powerful country directly controls less powerful countries and uses their resources to increase its own power and wealth. The difficulty of being colonialism stems from the fact that the term is often used as a synonym for imperialism. Both colonialism and imperialism were forms of conquest that were expected to benefit Europe economically and strategically. The term colonialism is frequently used to describe the settlement of North America, Australia, New Zealand, etc., and places that were controlled by a large population of permanent European residents. Whereas the term imperialism often describes cases in which a foreign government administration is realized in a territory without significant settlement. Typical examples include the scramble for Africa in the late 19th century and the American domination of the Philippines and Puerto Rico. The distinction between the two, however, is not entirely consistent in the literature. For example, some scholars distinguish between colonies for settlements and colonies for economic exploitation. Others use the term colonialism to describe dependencies that are directly governed by a foreign nation, and contrast with the imperialism, which involves indirect forms of domination. Post-colonial theories, academic genre criticized colonialist discourse inspired by Edward Said's book, Orientalism. Book displays a lack of curiosity about the truth of non-Western history and cultural practices. Also, there is considerable debate over the precise parameters of the field and the definition of the term post-colonial in a very general sense. It is the study of interaction between European nations and the societies they colonized in the modern period. Often this term is used to signify a position against colonial. Most former colonies are far from being free of colonial influence or domination, and so we cannot even consider them as a post-colonial. Post-colonial in condition that is characterized by the nation's fight for its independence. Mostly only this point is in the center of researchers, whereas they lose one of the most important things. When a state wants to go away from its colonial past, it mostly comes to the culture, language of mother state. It also damages the former colony itself, its society, and has a huge impact. When it comes to neo-colonial discourse, next one, Naira, please. It reminds me the idea of separation of the world on the global north and the south, where the south identifies so-called developed countries, the rich ones, and the south identifies lower income countries. Neocolonialism includes modern tools of dependence, such as military bases and financial capital, that influences the economy and even the policy of the less developed countries. So let's go through the history, through the Russian Empire and Soviet Union and its place on the South Caucasus. During the last centuries, the South Caucasus always have been the tidbit for empires. Ottoman, Persian, and Russian empires become the main actors in the region, which was one of the key bridges in the communications between Europe and Asia. Russian Empire actively started its enlargement in the Caucasus in the beginning of 19th century, almost 2 decades after the Treaty of Georgievsk, which established a protectorate of Russia under Kakheti, modern Eastern Georgia. Georgia became a part of Russian Empire. With the treaties of Gulistan and Turkmenchay, some territories of modern Azerbaijan, parts of Armenia and Georgia enlarged the Russian Empire. The process was continued with the established reality after the numerous Russo-Turkish wars. As an empire, Russia always, at the same time with its enlargement, was working on the suppression of successional policy that usually based on national identity conservation. The church and other educational entities was among the policy implementations that also was suppressed. Russian Revolution in 17 became the beginning of a new era in Russian politics. Of course, these types of scenarios have influence on minorities living in the empire. In May 1918, the independence of Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia were proclaimed. So thus imperialism had a huge impact on modern states, and the dissolution of Russian Empire brought a set of problems for the former empire as well as for its provincial parts. Later, the flow of Sovietization became the common political reality in the South Caucasus. In 1922, Transcaucasian Socialist Federative Soviet Republic, consisting of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia Soviet republics, was established, and this one existed till 1936. After that, all the states became the Union republics. So formally, 3 states were not colonies in a classic manner, but the reality is always more ambiguous than the theoretical frames. That period of time we may consider the colonial one because states have no right to establish diplomatic and trade relations with foreign states, and they have no military corps. The center was Moscow, but not Russian elite, somehow due to maybe proclaimed internationalism. That is one of the unique features that differs the Soviet case from the European one and classic understanding of what is colonial. The influence on decree of separation of church from state and school from church instead of the secular nature of the state power proclaimed the freedom of conscience and religion. So religious organizations were deprived of any property rights and the rights of a legal entity. This was the period that was considered as a restriction of rights. For example, for Armenia, the church was the entity that for a long period of time was functioning as a centralized power and conservator of national identity with its traditions and language, of course. Because of the thing that we today may call maybe bad management, let's say, the economic situation in the whole Soviet was the driver for the rise of the gray market and overwhelming corruption. The rise of nationalism since the end of 18th shared the region's future for further decades, as we can see even today. The disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1991 has crowned nearly a 5 centuries long period of Russian history when the imperial regime used to be the backbone and for the most of time, the form of Russian statehood. It of course had a huge impact on the world order, but for the former Soviet states, it was really momentous. Let's go through the Russian foreign policy dynamics since 1991. After the collapse of the USSR, Russia was concerned firstly on its domestic policy and the development of its relations with the European states under the main idea of democratic solidarity. One of the reasons for the Belarusian First Agreement was the fact that Russia got tired of being all-union donor. Russia became the USSR successor, holding its symbols, its hat with a residential in Kremlin, nuclear briefcase, and its place as an UN Security Council permanent member. The other states, despite the internal problems, have to find a better way to step into international politics, to establish relations with neighbors and, of course, other states. For Russian diplomacy, the priority was to adapt its new role of, let's say, no more superpower, and to find a new and apparently not leading place in the democratic world system. The diplomacy of so-called newly independent states was mainly oriented on establishing relations with the other world. So what was harder, to lose positions or to establish the new diplomatic school? There was an interesting phenomenon of this balance that we can see. The former great states, in the face of its successor, losing the part of its power, losing the parts of a state as an integral system. For example, the nuclear arsenal stay in Ukraine, the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, and numerous military bases were spread. For the other states, it became the way to establish or regain their sovereignty, despite the fact that it was achieved not via so-called natural way, meaning the independence through the war or referendum. Going through the type of process helps to establish some mechanism of authority formulation, the frames for its activities, and the roadmap of its independent future. As a result of pushed sovereignty that was in the case of former USSR states, the three independent ones of the South Caucasus among them have to maintain the balance in their relations and in their construction of interaction with Moscow. The formation of these republics has brought up a number of challenges in the region, since each of them has unique territorial and ethnic aspirations and socioeconomic priorities. In 1991, the reality has changed, and at the time there were a lot of internal problems. So there was no time and resources for the creation of a cutting-edge, new, like fresh foreign policy standards. One of the Russian scholars, Bogaturov, in 2008, it is important, he developed at that time the idea of 3 generations of Russian foreign policy doctrines, and it will help us to understand and visualize the reality that was seen by Russian scholars and authorities at that time. So the first generation of Russian foreign policy doctrine is a mix of Lenin's thesis and Gorbachev's. So Lenin's was the main purpose of the Soviet Russian foreign policy, the formation of external conditions for the creation of socialism, whereas Gorbachev's thesis was the new political thinking. According to that, the main all human value was the survival of humanity and its protection from the nuclear part. So at that time, Yeltsin remade those ideas and find the new way. The main purpose became the creation of external conditions to create democracy in Russia. And the main all human value became the democratization of those world, of the whole world. So the main concept in early 19th became the idea of democratic solidarity. For the nation, it was easy to adopt the ideology because of its formal similarity to the one that was before. It was so easy for them. At that time in Russia, there was no obvious need and even political wish and will to waste resources on relations establishment with the former USSR states. Firstly, because diplomacy was oriented on the Russian integration into the democratic world. Secondly, because there was no money to pay for academia development. And it is an interesting point that academia was left without financing after the collapse of the ideology-based state. So this fact also became one of the reasons for a brain drain. Academia becoming weaker, besides the representatives of academia that stay in Russia, become mostly specialists in the thing that we currently name American studies, because it was one of the very few ways to earn money being scholar in political science at that time. It may be considered also as a positive impact, like as a development of some sphere, but only in a narrow aspect. So these facts support the idea that during the first years after the USSR collapse, Russian foreign policy was, let's say, passive in the meaning of accommodative, whereas other former USSR members had to develop new strategies in foreign policy, despite the fact that the core national diplomats in those states were representatives of former Soviet apparatus. Russia went away not only from the former post-Soviet republics, but also from the Arab continent, African continent, and Latin America and South Asia. The limited resources were the reason for Russia to pay more attention and put in the first place its domestic policy, because there was a coup d'etat, in 1993 in Chechen issue. The existing economic problems mostly connected with the inflation, as well as psychological difficulties connected to the loss of, in Russian called Velикая держава, its superpower status. It became the signal for the Russian authorities. So well known as a pro-democratic foreign minister Kozyrev, as a liberal, in 1994, he turned back to the territory of the former USSR as an area of Russian special interests. So at the same year, this year became the year of Russian growing activity in the near abroad, including, of course, the South Caucasus. The Russian term near abroad is used to refer to those countries neighboring the Russian Federation, which until its collapse formed the part of the Soviet Union, so-called Union republics. So not only Primakov as a foreign minister opened the new era of Russian foreign policy, he also became known as a государственник, like statesman, who spoke about Russian national interests. It was since 1996. And he speaks also about the need to establish and develop relations also with Asian states, Arab countries, and Latin American ones. So his idea was to go back. Yes, it was the thing that in modern Russia they call pivot to east. The second half of 90s are called the selective cooperation. So it means the development of interaction with the West with some reservations. There was Kosovo case, of course, and dissolution of Yugoslavia was a painful problem. In reality, Russian authorities were afraid of the same destiny. In the last year of the 20th century, a Russian president signed military doctrine that took power in 2000. It is interesting that this doctrine included the point about the first nuclear strike. Possibly those facts, the dissolution of Yugoslavia and the point about the first nuclear strike, were somewhat interconnected. There were no extraordinary pivots with the new President Putin in 2000. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs were headed by the same person as before, and nobody at the beginning of a new century may suppose that Putin will be the main Russian policy changer. As he became the president, he started the path towards a centralized state with concentration on domestic issues. He started the live meetings tradition, as we know, and today it is one of the, let's say, light towers indicators for domestic and foreign policy analysis. Until about 2004, Russia was too weak and internally divided power to project power and influence in the wider Caucasus region. Also, the decision taken in 2005 to stop subsidizing Russian energy suppliers to Commonwealth of Independent States member turned out to be a real milestone event in Russian policy. This helped to this helped after to boost the economy after the years of decline. So, for example, from 2001, November till 2006, oil price reached from $30 per barrel to 48. So the next step in recovering Russian foreign policy was the realization of an idea to increase Russian role in international relations. In a summer meeting with diplomatic corps in 2006, Putin said that it is time to align Russian policy with its economic opportunities. So that was the next direction, next doctrine for Russian foreign policy. It is obvious that the South Caucasus, a region located in the 3-sea zone, oriented formed by Caspian, Black, and Mediterranean seas, become the active vector for Russian foreign policy after the turn in the second half of 2000s. NATO's enlargement, along with the Eastern Partnership Initiative, are seen in Russia as an attempt to decrease the Russian influence in the near abroad. At the same time, the concept of Russia as a great power formed, and it in reality replaced the imperial idea. So the significant difference between the empire and great power is the following. The empire is concerned about the development and support of non-central parts of the state, from time to time even more than on its central parts. Whereas, according to the status of great power, state makes emphasis above all on strengthening its own might and its own international influence. At the time, the term near abroad one more time was actualized. The understanding of these facts helps to imagine the regional and international order through the Russian lens. One of the features of this image also includes the idea of an area of vital interest. Here it is vital, out of the Russian borders. At the same time, Russian authorities see and try to eliminate the increasing influence of the third powers such as EU, Turkey, USA, China. Russian authorities look on that as a challenge, understanding that its own geopolitical ambitions are framed by economic and political realities. So changes in Russian foreign policy become obvious for international partners, especially after well-known Putin's speech on Munich Security Conference in 2007, where he spoke about NATO's enlargement as a factor that reduced the credibility in international relations, about the UN Security Council as the only body having right to legitimize the using of force, and that unipolar world has nothing in common with a democracy. So at the time, the general line was developed that the admission of former Soviet states to the Euro-Atlantic community was a challenge for Russian national security. So, but Russia, it is interesting that Russia itself wanted to establish stable relations with the West. This phenomenon is still alive when, like, opponent in the face of US or some EU states in Russia is used as a tool to influence the domestic audience and someone to the near abroad. The realities with EU and the USA are valuable for Russia itself, and particularly for its economy, despite the fact that authorities in times of crisis reduce the relations in reply, using sanctions as a useful tool. During the next period of Russian foreign policy that has started since 2006, since the mid of zeros, the main dates were 2008 and 2009 with the economic crisis and August War, 2014 and 15 with Ukrainian crisis and starting of military company in Syria. So for the South Caucasus region, the date was the 2020 Artsakh War with Russian mandate on deployment of peacekeeping forces. The situation in Belarus since 2020 that still is alive, all those events take up enormous resources and energy spent. So current doctrine, we may some way call based on increasing influence abroad policy. It is for Russia the time of establishing new Russia as a great power. Let's go through the bilateral relations with the South Caucasus states. The region that today consists of Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan is plagued by many of the typical dilemmas of post-Sovietism, including incomplete nation building, cultural disorientation, deeply rooted corruption, socioeconomic and environmental disintegration, regional conflict, fragile democratization, and criminal networks. For Russia, the region is highly important not only as a part of its foreign policy, but also as an element of its domestic security. So because the region shares the borders and history also with the South Caucasus, at the same time, geopolitically, Transcaucasus, like in Russian Zakavkazia, the South Caucasus region, is the crucial link between Europe and Asia. Therefore, its political stability and economic development is important to many countries in Asia and Europe. The South Caucasus is attached to the greater Middle East geographically and by Islamic factor, and to the Europe by its institutions like Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, Council of Europe, the European Union, NATO, and the aspirations of its elite. So, and to the Russian north, by economic dependence and complex cultural and demographic affiliations. It is like the modern Middle East region with important oil and natural gas holdings and a large number of unresolved local disputes. So Armenia in 1991, like all newly independent ex-Soviet, let's say post-Soviet republics, faced a complicated situation. The republic, among other problems, had also the consequences of the earthquake and difficulties at the time of Karabakh-Artsakh conflict. Beginning of independence, Armenia found itself in a blockade. The borders with Azerbaijan and Turkey were closed at that time, and it impacted, of course, its economic development. That was the reason for the predicted foreign policy. So Armenia can deal successfully only with Russia and Iran. Russia had a huge role in the ceasefire agreements as it was in 1994. It is now in 2020. Russia also was one of the mediators during the attempt to establish Armenia-Turkey dialogue through the Zurich protocols. After the collapse of the USSR, Armenia used the principle which we can call integration for survival, becoming later a member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization and Eurasian Economic Union. Armenia during the years became one of the loyalist states to Russian Federation among all the former USSR members, and in the region particularly. President Sahakyan, after negotiations with the EU on association agreements, it was in 2017, he instead of that association agreement, signed a comprehensive and enhanced partnership agreement and decided to join the Russia-centric economic union. Currently, the Commonwealth of Independent States and Collective Security Treaty Organization and Eurasian Economic Union are those tools that assist its foreign policy in the near abroad, including, of course, Armenian case. So Artsakh problem with its two ceasefire agreements, dependence on the Russian energy suppliers, its assistance in military sphere, like we have in Armenia, we have base in Gyumri, and currently enlargement of Russian military presence is considered, and security issues and Russian presence in Armenian economy in strategic areas in face of South Caucasus railroads, the company of the Russian railroads, Armrus Gazprom, Metamor nuclear power plant, electric networks, etc. There are a lot of companies that are included in the let's say key points of Armenian national security. All those factors lead Armenia to establish and develop relations with Russia in that logic that we have today. It is symbolic that Armenian and Russian border guards are on the former Soviet border. So currently, our borders of Armenia, Turkey, and Armenia, Iran are guarded by the common guards. So the so-called Velvet Revolution in 2018 was proclaimed as an internal event that had no links with Armenian foreign policy, but reality is more complicated and affected on the security issues in the whole region. Currently, Armenia is still in the face of post-colonial relations with Russia, having no other options in the blocked region. So Georgia-Russia relations depend on several factors, including the South Ossetia and Abkhazia issues. In the very early 19th, Russia was involved in the negotiation of the South Ossetia and Abkhazia with the signed Sochi and Moscow agreements. But Russia also has the military presence at that time in Georgia. Internal factors such as the Second Chechen Company and almost not controlled Pankisi become one of the reasons to reduce the level of relations. After the Rose Revolution and further negative developments on bilateral relations, both sides weakened the leverage to influence each other. At the same time, Russian capital still exists in Georgian energy and communication sectors. So despite the fact that after 2008 war, Russia recognized Abkhazia and South Ossetia independence, Russia and Georgia seem to break up. In reality, with both states, they understand the challenges that minimize the other side for its own national security issues. So relatively stabilization was seen after the elections in 2012, when the Georgian Dream Coalition was elected with the Prime Minister Ivanishvili. In 2040, economic activation was seen some way. In reality, Russians see the ideal of the Georgian political mainstream as a democratic unitary state within the borders of the Georgian Soviet Republic, integrated into the Western security structures. The Georgian European choice was viewed as anti-Russian. So that is the main problem of Russian attitude towards its near abroad. In spite of the current very low level of relations, Georgia and Russia have the same challenges in the face of terrorist entities that pass from the Middle East conflict zones. The strengthening Turkey is also a challenge for Georgia with its Muslim populated regions and economy that partly depends on Turkey's will and its investments. The less Russia is involved in the region, the less options and alternatives Georgia has in the relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan. So in the case of Azerbaijan-Russo bilateral relations, the development in the first years after the restoration of the independence was painful. So both sides, Azerbaijan and Russia, adjusting to the new realities, which was difficult. In December 91, Russia closed its border in the frames of the operation called Restoration of Constitutional Order in Chechnya, based on the Russian charge that Baku was rendering military assistance to Chechnya. Azerbaijan since 1994 started to become an actor in international relations due to its opportunities as an energy supplier. The reduction of Russian position in the Caspian Sea after the dissolution of the USSR is tremendous, despite the internal situation of the Nagorno-Karabakh-Artsakh conflict 1994 and Russian leverages on that issue. Azerbaijan in 1997 became a member of Guam and 2 years ago left the collective security, pro-Russian, let's say, collective security treaty organization. Years later, relations got better, and in 2001, the president of Russia paid an official visit to Azerbaijan, his first official visit. Russia tried to support bilateral relations, for example, during a few years, during 14 years, Russian company Lukoil invested in Azerbaijan more than $1 billion. Russian capital exists in the financing system of Azerbaijan, like in the face of Uralsib, VTB banks. In all, over 500 Russian companies are doing business in Azerbaijani market. Among them, more than 100 70 companies are only with Russian capital. So the problem of the Samur River that was exist on the border was solved in 2010 by the agreement on the delimitation. Azerbaijan demanded a sharp increase in the rent Russia was paying for the Soviet-era Ghalaba radar station, as you know. The station was part of the Soviet and Russian strategic early warning. So Azerbaijan stuck to its price demands, and the Russians eventually closed the station at the end of 2012. Sorry. It is also important to mention that Azerbaijan is the only country with growing population in our region. Its population has risen since 1991 from more than 7 million to more than 10. Azerbaijan was not able to withdraw from post-colonial ties, and as history shows, become even more dependent, but on another state, Turkey. In reality, Turkey became a proactive power in the region, especially after the Artsakh War in 2020. And it was the president when in Russian near abroad, when in the former USSR state, the Russian weakened influence changed by the rising Turkish one. That was the exceptional occasion on Russian toleration of NATO member in its near abroad. Another principal point about Russia-Azerbaijan relations is that before the Artsakh War 2020, Azerbaijan also was a state that protected Russian borders from radical elements. Currently, things some way changed. But in reality, their relations are characterized as a partnership. So South Caucasus states, as other ones, after the dissolution of the USSR, have to find their own way to its independence through breakup from the Soviet core. The separation from the mother state is always painful and expensive, but the key obvious logic is that following preserving better relations lead to stronger dependence and fewer opportunities for former colonies in establishing new strategic partnerships. So there are a few scenarios to go out of these, let's say, abusive relations of dependence, let's say. So first, you can cut down your relations or to develop till the moment when you become almost on the same weight, at least on some points, to wait till one former mother state or colony or more will disappear or change cardinally. And as a probable result of the third point, significant change in global and regional orders. So in the South Caucasus, 3 states are currently going towards different types of relations. Georgia and Russia cut down their relations. Azerbaijan, after 94 contact of the century, started to develop its own all-rich relations with the West, weakening the ties with Russia, but still saving dependence on Nagorno-Karabakh Artsakh issue. Armenia currently is the most dependent on relations with Russia, and in a few years, it is difficult to see any other option. So let's try to implement it and to see post-colonial and neo-colonial aspects in the South Caucasus. It is time to project it and to understand the reality in which we exist. As it was mentioned before, the implementation of post-colonial and neo-colonial aspects in our case is made with some ifs. You should remember it. If we look at the interaction between European nations and the society they colonized in the modern period, we can see parallels with the similar post-Soviet era and interaction of the Russian Federation with its so-called near abroad. In the case of the South Caucasus, the mix of post-colonial, neo-colonial happened. Usually post-colonial is based on the going away from post-colonial past through the rise of national identity, which is usually linked to the culture, traditions, and language. The post-colonial aspects also include the anti-colonial features. In fact, the post-colonial is created as a response to the colonial. They are bonded together. In many near-broad states, the post-colonial period is characterized with the desovietization, derussification. The last one, in some cases, was due to natural reasons, such as migration of Russians, and the growth of the local population, which happened in Azerbaijan case. So another interesting question is about Russia itself. Can we watch through the same lens on Russia after 1991? If so, does it mean that Russia has a past of battle with its own past? Probably that was the period of so-called democratic solidarity that after helped to find a vector of further development. In this case, I can also add that for the other former USSR states, it was easier to build its own identity, also on the basis of anti-Sovietism. Whereas Russia cannot make the same in the same manner, of course. Those ideas help to find a nation's image on what are self and what is other, and for society, for certain society, and how this self and other interact with each other. So despite the well-known international platforms, as I have mentioned, Collective Security Treaty Organization, Eurasian Economic Union, Russia expands its policy on the near abroad through ideas such as Russian world. Maybe you have heard about it. The concept of Russian world also covers numerous Russian-speaking communities inside the near abroad, native Russian communities. The concept of Russian world was a factor that was forgotten by Russian authorities after the collapse of the Union, when there were a lot of communities, Russian communities in different states. But now in modern Russia, in the Crimea case, this point was, let's say, actualized. Orthodox world also some way included in the understanding of Russian world. It is some term with no strict, let's say, borders. Organizations such as Gorchakov Fund, I'm sure you've heard about it, Россотрудничество, it is a federal agency for the Commonwealth of Independent State Affairs, compatriots living abroad, and international humanitarian cooperation. That all those words mean the Россотрудничество, and Russian Center for Science and Culture are the main providers of Russian soft power also in our region. As I've mentioned, in near abroad, the mix of post-colonial and neo-colonial happened. In reality, the neo-colonial tools, such as Collective Security Treaty Organization, was established before its application as a mechanism in the light of neo-colonial theory. Post-colonial does not emphasize the role of colony, which as much as neo-colonial does. So in neo-colonial case, it is much more important to highlight the colony's role. So we can say that Armenia currently is in a hybrid regime of post and neo-colonial. Georgia is on its post-colonial relations with Russia and comparable to neo-colonial with the West, whereas Azerbaijan is on its post-colonial relations with Russia and like neo-colonial with Turkey. So I want to, after like short lecture, to interact with you, and I have a question. I hope we will interact some way. So why does neither Russia nor one of the South Caucasus states succeed to develop the proper strategy towards each other? Can someone help me and say like his or her ideas about it? No, no one wants.
Guys, are you hearing us?
Sorry?
It's me, Anush. I'm asking,
yeah.
are they hearing us?
Actually, yes. I'm hearing you. South Caucasus states succeed to develop the proper strategy towards each other. It's $1 million question. If students are hesitant to try to answer this question,
Gork,
I can tell, but I don't know whether Anush agrees or not. I think either we have to talk too much about it, and it's a lengthy sort of theme, or say with one word, because of nationalism.
Some way, yeah.
Gorkem has raised the hand, so I guess he has the answer.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I don't have an answer, but I have some guess. I think it was very clear from your presentation, from your excellent presentation. First of all, we shouldn't think South Caucasus as homogeneous, because you clearly identified that these three states, they have different external and internal conditions. This is the first thing. I think we shouldn't think that these three South Caucasus states as one. And secondly, we need to also consider, as you did in your presentation, other external actors. Russia is not alone, but we should also consider Turkey, Iran, and also European Union to some extent. So I think this is also second point, that other external relations and Russia relations with these external relations, particularly with Turkey and Iran, should be also considered. And the third one that I can say, that I think the problem is that we are so much dependent on one partner. We are lack of developing multi-vector foreign policy, because if we are alone, or if we achieve these multi-vector policies or hybrid foreign policy that connect with each other, then we don't need so much Russia that much, because there's an asymmetric power relation. Russia is so powerful, unlike the other states in the region.
Thank you for brilliant answer. Yes, you have mentioned like most of the important points, that Russia also, every one of us, each of us have, let's say, more important problems. For Russia, it is actually like relations with China and relations with US and European states. Relations, I mean, not the best, but the wish to establish some way these relations are more important than the South Caucasus. Armenia.
Anush, sorry, before you say your version, I see also another hand. So let's listen what Georgian view will be on that.
Okay, I will try to answer if you can hear me. I hesitated to answer because there is some kind of works going on. There are terrible noises, but hope you can hear still my voice. I think main thing why it does not succeed was that when you have two parties or more parties, you have to first realize that you are equal parties, and I think that the parties from Armenia or Georgia, they didn't saw that Russia saw us as equal. And even when you want to start talking about something and develop some kind of progress in everything, you just need to realize that other party appreciates you and sees you. And when you don't see such actions towards you, you just don't want to start something towards the person who are not going to do something in your power or in your side. That was my answer. Thank you.
Thank you too. Do we have anyone who wants to answer now?
Leila.
Leila.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And as the previous Naira Sahakyan, or am I pronouncing it correctly? Okay, as she mentioned, it's good to interact with our colleagues from Armenia. It's good. Although I do interact at some points because of my job, but it's interesting to interact in the academic sphere. So I appreciate this opportunity. And thanks, Georgia, for creating this opportunity. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to interact somehow. So as an answer to the question, I think this question has an answer in itself. and in the presentation because of nationalism, as David correctly pointed out, and as competing narratives, I would say, as we have heard in the yesterday's and the day previous, we had discussions about these competing narratives of the history, different interpretations of the history. And I can see it even in the presentation, for example, even if we cannot name the things, the obvious things. For example, if you say Artsakh War, I would say Karabakh War. This is like a simplest example of that. We cannot agree on that because of the competing histories and the national narratives, nationalism generally. So post-colonialism or neo-colonialism and the classic colonialism have had and they will have their impacts on that in parallel with our nationalism. So that's I think that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you for answer, and not only for an answer, like really I appreciate this type of interactions. And thanks to Georgia, of course, like now for giving this hub, let's say, this type of bridge for us. So yeah, you have mentioned almost everything. In reality, I just want to add the thing that during examining these relations, it became obvious that neither Russia has the strategy in its relations to the South Caucasus, nor does we have. So there are some attempts to create visions. I see those attempts and follow them. But one of the reasons for that is that the former USSR republics having common pasts make the same mistake. They presume that they know each other and there is no need to waste sources on examination of each other, evaluation of the opportunities and understanding of primary interest, no, let's say, proclaimed goals. So in the face of a former colony or mother state, it may cost losing former loyal partners, as it was with in Georgia-Russia case, whereas for former colonies, it may have territorial or sovereign loss. Loss, I mean, not the let's say 100% one, but some way we understand that when there is someone else, we may lose the part of our sovereignty. So thank you for your answers. Thank you for your interaction. If you have any questions, I will try to do my best to answer.
Anush, thank you very much. It was very informative. You covered lots of aspects of our rather complex existence in socio-political and, in a way, economic, but also cultural, civilizational sort of existence. And so it's time for questions or comments. Actually, with your help, we already started this process, and we can continue. Anybody wants to?
Yes.
Yes.
Don't you mind if I start?
Yes. Who is that? Anush or Naira? Maybe you just take off the slide because we don't see each other. I don't see who talks.
Fully agree.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Actually, it's not that much question, but more comment, and I'd like to hear our students' answers on this issue as well. When Anush was talking, she mentioned that academia, after the collapse of the USSR, weakened. But I doubt this, that because I don't think that Russian academia or post-Soviet academia weakened, but it was more about the thing that after the collapse of the USSR, and with these open borders, Russian academia had something to be compared. And that was the academia of the West, especially the US academia. And maybe that is why they started talking about developing, because they have already that Western model of developed academia. And up to now, all of us trying to somehow develop and reach that model, though it's really hard. And another question I want to, not that question, but at least some kind of comment. When Anush said that Armenia was a Christian nation first, or something like that, and then when she was describing Azerbaijan and Turkey relations, she mentioned despite deep differences in religious issues. I would really love to hear Azerbaijani and Turkish students, do they really feel that difference? Because when I have been studying Islamic studies, I had a lot of Turkish, Azerbaijani, Tatar, Muslim friends, and I don't think that they feel these differences in everyday life. So we have two kind of dimensions. First one is academia, when we study these differences, Shia Sunni issues and some other stuff. And then we have everyday life when people just cooperate, deal with each other, and do they really feel this difference? Because same I can say about Armenians and Georgians. I don't think that when I met Georgian, I talk about differences in our Christianities.
Who wants to answer?
Gorkem and then Leila, I think. If I'm not mistaken.
Leila, you can go first and then I can continue.
Okay, thank you. First, I wanted to comment on that, but later I changed my mind. When Anush mentioned the split of religious split between Azerbaijan and Turkey, I wanted to comment, but later on I changed my mind. So it's good that you pointed out Naira. So we do not feel it, actually. The nation building process is still on the way. In Azerbaijan, at least, not in Turkey probably, but in Azerbaijan it's still on the way. And the major feature of our national identity, as I feel as a person who lives here, who have been living in Azerbaijan almost all of my life, so I don't feel it. We are secular country, Azerbaijan, despite the fact that we are like majority of the Muslims in Azerbaijan are from Shia, I would say background, because most of people are not observant, at least until recently. Most of them have been non-observant. So people really do not, they know that they are Muslims, they are from Shia background, but they do not practice it. Therefore, they do not face this difficulty in dealing with Turks, because it doesn't matter. So in a state level, I would say this is not an issue, because on the nation building process, we say Azerbaijanchilik, Azerbaijaniness, something like that, if I would translate literally. So this is being Azerbaijani, because we have Lazgis, Talish, Tat, Kurd, Armenian, Georgian, and all of this. This is a multinational country. So why we do not fix on the ethnicity? Because although majority, like we say, titulная nация, the title nation is Turks, but we have all other diverse backgrounds in terms of ethnicity. So we stick on Azerbaijani rather than on ethnicity or religious background. So that would be my answer. Thank you.
Okay.
I also wanted to comment the same. Turkish and Azerbaijani relations from a post-colonial or neo-colonial perspective, there were so much question mark on my mind, and I wanted to also comment it. I don't know if there are some works that they basically analyze Turkish and Azerbaijani relations from a colonial perspective, because it's also something new for me to understand it. And also I agree with Leyla that at least in Turkey, we don't feel that differences, but within Turkey, we don't also feel the differences because Turkey is a very big country. And from external point, you can think that we are a Muslim country because of the current regime, but we are also a secular country. And you can see also so much differences within the Turkey related with the religious practices. For instance, I'm from Istanbul, and you can see so many Western European people, but at the same time, the Muslim at the same time. And also related with the Ottoman past because of the cultural and Islamic or religious mosaic. We live this multiculturalism within the Turkey. I know from a political side, maybe it's not that much, but at least in a society level, this is not something new. With Azerbaijan, we don't feel any differences, but also I would like to point that we are not all Muslim because there are also Jewish Turkish, there are also Christian Turkish. Although it's not perfect, I know within the Turkey at the political level, but at the societal level, we have this multiculturalism.
Okay, some other issues because Anush's presentation was so complex.
Yeah.
And I would encourage also think of what Görkem mentioned, whether post and neo-colonialism is a concept appropriate for the relations between former master and colony only, not with some other countries which I mean, were not so closely linked to each other, and now only in the 21st century they develop something similar to neocolonialism. But I think it's more appropriate for former, historically, in this way developed, centers and peripheries. Don't you agree, Aida, Anush, or others? So that's why I am also sort of inclined to say that post or neo-colonialism is appropriate term for instance, Georgia-Russia relations, but hardly appropriate for Georgian-American or Georgian-European or Georgian-Turkish relations.
Yes, I think for additional point, I was like saying like neo-colonial, I mean the idea of dependence through the economic links and through the military links. Yeah, you for sure you're right. Because, it is like in a traditional way that we think it is the links of post-empire and its oh my god, like it's dependent, let's say, dependent entities. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I'm saying it not because that in the foreseeable future there cannot be any problems in Georgia-Turkish relations, for example. I don't know. No one can predict for 100% what will happen in years or decades to come. But until now, since we developed relations with Turkey, I have never seen and never heard of any attempt from Turkey to interfere in internal Georgian politics. Only cases when Turkey becomes interested in internal political life is when some Turkish businessman experiences difficult treatment from Georgian law enforcers. In this case, yes, but that would have happened in any country between any nations. But in case of Russia, I mean, that's continuous. Russia tries to somehow maintain hold over internal politics of our respective societies.
That was some kind of phantom pains for Russia, because it still doesn't accept the collapse of empire, I guess, because even in their foreign policy, it's really mixed. And I mean that in the case of Turkey, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire and the establishment of Republican Turkey was 100 years ago. After that, Turkey has its own borders, though now it's some kind of trying to reestablish this empire with its expansions, but at least during the Ataturk era and after that, it was Turkey with its own borders. In the case of Russia, that was the Soviet Union, another type of empire. So when we talk about colonialism and post-colonialism and then neo-colonialism, I always have question, was Soviet period post-colonial, or it was also some kind of colonial? We have a lot of I mean examples. If you read some sources from the Central Asia written during the Soviet years, you can see that someone called himself Muslim atheist. So this is very vivid example how these terms are interconnected, or at least they are not so clear cut. When we use them, well, okay, there was colonial era, then post-colonial, and now we have this neo-colonial. But it's very mixed. It's very complicated, and perhaps it's important to clarify every time we use these terms. Otherwise, we will just lose ourselves in this diversity.
Of course, I agree. These are just ideal types,
yeah,
in a Weberian sense, and the reality is always more specific. Anybody else? Comments, questions? Okay, then if no one has a reflection so far, or so no more, then let me thank first of all Anush, and with of course Naira's involvement and help, and very much hope that our cooperation in this academic domain will continue. From our side, we will do our best to make it happen and to have further occasions to exchange our views, opinions. I think also my Azeri young colleagues would agree that it's extremely interesting to watch how things are developing in Armenia, for us, for Georgians, also for Azerbaijani people, and the vice versa. So at least we understand that despite clear-cut, sort of integrated, cooperative relations, which would have been as intensive as it happens among peaceful European nations within the frames of regional organizations. We don't have it here, but the understanding how much interdependent we are definitely exists. And that's the reality which sort of forces us to learn more and more about each other, and then somehow try even to learn about our commonalities together.